In the grand halls of Ashworth Manor, a young servant girl moves through her days unseen, her hands worn from work, her voice rarely heard beyond the servants' quarters. She has learned her place in the world, accepting that some are born to command while others are born to serve. But fate has other plans. When the Duke of Ashworth returns from war, something shifts. He sees what others have missed: a quiet strength, a pure heart, and a spirit that refuses to be broken by circumstance. One evening, in the dim light of the library, he leans close and whispers words that will change everything. "You're the one I'll marry." In that moment, the careful order of their world begins to crumble. What happens when love dares to cross the most forbidden line of all? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning bell at Ashworth Manor rang at 4:30, as it had every morning for the past 8 years. Eleanor Hartley woke in her narrow attic room, the pre-dawn darkness still heavy against the small window that overlooked the kitchen gardens. She rose without complaint, as she always did, her body accustomed to the rhythm of service that governed every hour of her existence. At 24, Eleanor had spent a third of her life within these walls. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every draft that whispered through the servants' corridors, every temperament of the cast-iron stove in the kitchen below. The manor was vast, built in the classical style with honey-colored stone that glowed golden in afternoon light. It sat on 300 acres of carefully tended grounds in the heart of Derbyshire, a monument to old money and older traditions. Eleanor dressed quickly in the dim light, her fingers moving through the familiar motions. The black woolen dress, pressed and mended countless times, the white apron, starched and spotless, the cap that covered her chestnut hair, pinned back in a simple bun. In the cracked mirror above her washstand, she saw what everyone else saw: a servant. Unremarkable, necessary but invisible. She made her way down the narrow back stairs, her footsteps soft against the worn wood. The servants' domain existed in a parallel world to the grand rooms above. Down here, the walls were plain plaster, the floors bare boards instead of polished parquet. This was where the real work happened. The endless labor that kept the illusion of effortless grace alive in the rooms where the family lived. Mrs. Pemberton was already in the kitchen, her formidable presence filling the space like a general surveying her troops. She had been head housekeeper for 30 years, her iron gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her eyebrows in permanent surprise. She nodded at Eleanor's arrival, approval in the gesture. Eleanor was never late. "The silver needs polishing in the drawing room," Mrs. Pemberton said without preamble. "Lady Ashworth wants everything perfect. The Duke returns today." The words hung in the air, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. The Duke, Alexander Ashworth, heir to the estate, master of all they served. He had been gone for 3 years, away at war, fighting in campaigns that were whispered about in the servants' hall but never fully understood. Now he was coming home. Eleanor had seen him only a handful of times before he left. He had been 29 then, tall and serious, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at the people around him. She remembered thinking he carried himself with the weariness of someone much older, even then. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton," Eleanor replied, her voice quiet and respectful. This was the tone she had perfected over years of service. Never bold, never familiar, never assuming she had the right to opinions or observations. Beyond her assigned tasks, she collected her supplies and made her way through the green baize door that separated the servants' world from the family's. The drawing room was on the first floor, a magnificent space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the south lawn. Morning light was just beginning to filter through the heavy brocade curtains, casting long shadows across the Persian carpets. Eleanor set to work on the silver tea service displayed on the mahogany sideboard. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, the polish filling the air with its sharp metallic scent. This was meditative work, the kind that allowed her mind to wander while her body performed its duties. She thought, as she often did, about the life she might have had if circumstances had been different. Her father had been a country vicar, her mother the daughter of a modest landowner. They had not been wealthy, but they had been respectable. Eleanor had been educated, taught to read and write, exposed to books and ideas that most servants never encountered. Then fever had taken her parents within days of each other when she was 16. The small living had gone to the next vicar, and Eleanor had found herself alone in the world with no inheritance, no family, and no prospects beyond the charity of distant relations who made it clear she was a burden they could not afford. Mrs. Pemberton had been a friend of her mother's. The position at Ashworth Manor had been an act of kindness, though kindness wrapped in the harsh reality of service. Eleanor had learned quickly that her education, her former life, meant nothing here. She was a servant, and that was all she would ever be. She had made peace with it, or so she told herself. There was dignity in honest work, in a job done well. She had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and the occasional kindness from people like Thomas, the stable hand who had become something like a friend in the careful way servants could be friends. Thomas was her age, the son of a farmer who had lost his land to debt. He had kind eyes and steady hands, and he never made her feel less than human, which was more than could be said for many. They would sometimes sit together in the kitchen after the evening meal, talking quietly about small things. Books she had managed to borrow from the library when no one was looking, the changing seasons. Dreams that felt safer spoken aloud in the presence of someone who understood their impossibility. The silver gleamed under her cloth, reflecting her distorted image back at her. She moved to the candlesticks, tall and ornate, relics of a time when such things spoke of wealth and power. They still did, she supposed. Some things never changed. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew her attention to the windows. She moved to the edge of the curtain, careful not to be seen, and looked out at the sweeping drive. A black carriage pulled by 4 matched horses approached the front entrance. The Duke's carriage. He was home. Eleanor watched as footmen rushed to attend, as the carriage door opened and a tall figure stepped out. 3 years had changed him. Alexander Ashworth moved with a different kind of purpose now, his shoulders broader, his face harder. He wore civilian clothes, well-tailored and expensive, but something in the way he carried himself spoke of battlefields and command. Lady Ashworth appeared at the entrance, her elegant figure draped in dove-gray silk. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, her posture perfect, her expression carefully controlled. She embraced her son with restrained affection, the kind of greeting that spoke of duty and propriety rather than warmth. Eleanor stepped back from the window, suddenly aware that she was intruding on a moment not meant for her eyes. She returned to her work, but her mind stayed with the scene outside. The Duke was home, and with his return, the entire rhythm of the household would shift. There would be formal dinners, social calls, the constant parade of expectations that came with his position. She finished the silver and moved through the rest of her morning duties. The library needed dusting. The music room required fresh flowers. The guest rooms had to be aired in case visitors arrived. Eleanor moved through the manor like a ghost, present but unseen, her footsteps silent on the thick carpets. The library was her favorite room, though she would never admit it aloud. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, their leather spines arranged in perfect order. The smell of old paper and wood polish filled the air, a scent she associated with everything she had lost, and everything she still yearned for. She dusted carefully, reverently, sometimes allowing her fingers to trail across the titles: philosophy, poetry, history, novels that transported readers to worlds beyond their own. She had read many of them over the years, stealing moments late at night when the house slept, returning them before dawn so no one would know she had dared to touch what was not meant for her. There was one book in particular she returned to again and again. A collection of romantic poetry, worn with age, its pages soft from countless readings. She had found it years ago, tucked behind newer volumes, forgotten by whoever had placed it there. Eleanor had claimed it as her own secret treasure, reading it by candlelight, memorizing verses that spoke of love and longing and the kind of passion that seemed to exist only in words. She pulled it from the shelf now, opening it to a familiar page. The margins were filled with her own careful annotations, thoughts and reactions written in pencil so faint they could barely be seen. This was her rebellion, her small claim to a life of the mind in a world that wanted only her hands. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she whispered, reading a line that had been copied there in someone else's hand long ago. "That perches in the soul." The door opened behind her. Eleanor's heart seized the book, nearly slipping from her fingers. She turned to find Lady Ashworth standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I beg your pardon, my lady," Eleanor said quickly, closing the book and returning it to the shelf with trembling hands. "I was only dusting." Lady Ashworth entered the room with measured steps, her silk skirts whispering against the floor. She moved to the window, looking out at the grounds with the practiced gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime managing an estate of this magnitude. "My son has returned," she said, her voice carrying the cultured accent of the aristocracy. "There will be expectations, dinners, gatherings. He must be reintroduced to society properly." "Yes, my lady," Eleanor replied, keeping her eyes lowered. "He has been at war for 3 years. Such experiences change a man." Lady Ashworth turned from the window, her gaze settling on Eleanor for the first time. "He will need order, routine, the familiar comforts of home." Eleanor nodded, uncertain what response was expected of her. Lady Ashworth rarely addressed servants directly, preferring to issue instructions through Mrs. Pemberton. This attention felt unusual, almost uncomfortable. "You have been with us for some time," Lady Ashworth continued, her tone thoughtful. 8 years, I believe. Mrs. Pemberton speaks well of your work." "Thank you, my lady. I am grateful for the position." "Gratitude is appropriate." Lady Ashworth's expression softened slightly, though it remained distant. "Your mother was a gentlewoman. I remember her. It is unfortunate that circumstances brought you to service, but you have adapted admirably." The words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Lady Ashworth knew who she had been, had always known, yet nothing had changed. Eleanor's past meant nothing against the rigid structures that governed their world. "I do my best." "My lady," Eleanor managed, "see that you continue to do so." Lady Ashworth moved toward the door, then paused. "The Duke will require his study prepared. Fresh linens, his preferred books arranged on the desk. Mrs. Pemberton will provide you with the details." "Of course, my lady." Lady Ashworth departed, leaving Eleanor alone with the echo of their conversation. She steadied herself against the bookshelf, her breath coming more quickly than it should. The brief exchange had shaken something loose inside her, a reminder that she existed in a liminal space between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The entire household seemed to vibrate with renewed energy now that the Duke had returned. Meals were planned with extra care, rooms were inspected with heightened scrutiny, and servants moved with increased purpose through their duties. Eleanor prepared the Duke's study according to Mrs. Pemberton's precise instructions. It was a masculine space, all dark wood and leather, with a massive desk positioned before a window that overlooked the estate's western fields. She placed fresh paper in the desk drawers, arranged pens and ink, and selected volumes from the library that she had been told were his favorites. Military history, classical philosophy, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius that looked as though it had traveled to war and back. As she worked, she found herself wondering about the man who would occupy this space. What had he seen in 3 years of war? What had changed him? The figure she had glimpsed from the drawing room window had seemed harder than she remembered, as though something vital had been worn away by experience. Evening fell, bringing with it the elaborate ritual of dinner. Eleanor helped serve, moving through the dining room with practiced invisibility. The Duke sat at the head of the long table, Lady Ashworth to his right. They spoke in low tones, their conversation punctuated by the clink of silver against china. Eleanor kept her eyes on her tasks, but she was aware of him in a way she had not anticipated. His presence filled the room, commanding attention even when he sat in silence. She noticed the way his hand occasionally moved to his side, as though remembering an injury. The way his jaw tightened when his mother mentioned the names of young ladies who would be suitable matches. When she leaned forward to refill his wineglass, he looked up. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. His were gray, she realized, the color of storm clouds before rain. In that fraction of a second, she saw something unexpected. Weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. Then the moment passed. Eleanor stepped back, and the Duke returned his attention to his mother's words. But something had shifted. She had been seen, truly seen, even if only for a heartbeat. Later that night, after the dinner service had ended and the family had retired, Eleanor sat in the servants' hall with Thomas. The room was warm from the kitchen fire, the air thick with the smell of bread dough rising for tomorrow's breakfast. Most of the other servants had gone to bed, leaving them in comfortable solitude. "You're quiet tonight?" Thomas observed, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Just tired," Eleanor said, though it was not entirely true. "The Duke seems changed," Thomas said, his voice thoughtful. "War does that to men. I've seen it before. They come back with shadows in their eyes. Did you speak with him?" "Briefly, when I attended to his horse. He thanked me. Looked me in the eye when he did it." Thomas shook his head slowly. "That's rare, you know. Most of them look through us like we're made of air." Eleanor nodded, understanding what he meant. The aristocracy had perfected the art of not seeing those who served them. It was not cruelty exactly. It was simply the way things were, the natural order that no one questioned. "Mrs. Pemberton says there will be visitors soon," Thomas continued. "Ladies and their mothers, all angling for a duke's attention. He'll be expected to choose a wife before the season ends." "That's what dukes do," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Suppose so." Thomas drained his tea and stood, stretching his back. "Best get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day." After he left, Eleanor remained in the quiet hall, staring into the dying embers of the fire. She thought about the Duke's gray eyes, that moment of connection that had probably meant nothing to him, but had unsettled something in her. She thought about Lady Ashworth's words, the acknowledgement of who Eleanor had been before service claimed her. And she thought about the poetry book in the library, her secret companion, filled with words about love and longing written by people who had probably never scrubbed a floor or polished silver until their hands ached. "Hope is the thing with feathers." The line came back to her, unbidden. What was hope to someone like her? What use were feathers to someone who would never fly? She climbed the narrow stairs to her attic room, the floorboards creaking under her feet. The house settled around her, its old bones sighing in the darkness. Through her small window, she could see a light burning in the Duke's study. He was awake then, unable to rest in this place that was supposed to be home. Eleanor undressed and lay in her narrow bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that would be the same as tomorrow. This was the truth of her life, the rhythm she had accepted. The Duke's return changed nothing for her. He existed in one world, she in another, and the boundary between them was as solid as the stone walls of the manor itself. Yet as she closed her eyes, she saw those gray eyes again, saw that flicker of recognition, of seeing, and despite herself, despite years of learning not to want what she could never have, something stirred in her chest, something dangerous and foolish, something that felt almost like hope. The candle in the Duke's study burned late into the night. Alexander Ashworth sat at his desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, staring at papers he was not reading. The house was familiar, yet strange, like returning to a place remembered from childhood, and finding it smaller than memory suggested. Everything was as it should be. His mother, elegant and proper, the servants, efficient and invisible, the grounds, immaculately maintained. Yet it all felt hollow. A beautiful shell with nothing living inside it. He thought about the young woman who had served at dinner. Dark hair tucked beneath her cap, eyes that had met his for the briefest moment before looking away. There had been something in that glance, something that suggested a person existed beneath the uniform. Intelligence, awareness, a quiet strength that reminded him of soldiers he had commanded, people who endured what must be endured without complaint. He did not know her name. He should not care to know it. Yet the memory lingered as he finally extinguished the candle and made his way to bed, moving through rooms that felt both familiar and foreign, like a ghost haunting his own life. 3 weeks passed in the familiar rhythm of manor life. The Duke settled into his role with quiet determination, meeting with his steward about estate matters, corresponding with solicitors about business affairs, and enduring his mother's careful orchestration of social obligations. Eleanor continued her duties, glimpsing him occasionally in passing but never speaking, never approaching closer than necessary. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, unseasonably warm for early spring. Lady Ashworth had taken the carriage to visit neighbors, and most of the household staff were occupied with their various tasks. Eleanor had been assigned to clean the library, a job she always volunteered for when possible. The room was empty, or so she believed. She worked methodically, dusting the higher shelves with a long-handled brush, then moving to the lower ones where her hands could reach the books themselves. When she came to the familiar spine of the poetry collection, she paused. It had been weeks since she had dared to open it, aware that her earlier encounter with Lady Ashworth had been too close to discovery. But the house was quiet. The afternoon light was golden through the windows, and the temptation was too strong. She pulled the book from the shelf and opened it to a page marked with a pressed flower she had placed there long ago. The petals were brittle now, their color faded to pale purple. She read softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly because you tread on my dreams." "Yeats," a voice said behind her. Eleanor gasped, the book slipping from her fingers. It hit the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. She spun around to find the Duke standing in the doorway, still dressed in riding clothes, his dark hair slightly disheveled. "I am so sorry. Your Grace," Eleanor stammered, dropping into a curtsy and reaching for the fallen book simultaneously. "I did not know anyone was here. I was only dusting. I should not have—" "You were reading," he said, moving into the room. His voice was not angry, merely observant. "Forgive me." Eleanor's hands trembled as she retrieved the book. "It will not happen again." He crossed the space between them in a few long strides and held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor placed the book in his palm, her face burning with shame. The Duke opened it to the page where it had fallen, his gray eyes scanning the verses. Then he noticed something. His finger traced the faint pencil marks in the margin, Eleanor's careful annotations written years ago. "These notes," he said quietly. "They are yours?" There was no point in lying. "Yes, Your Grace." He read one of her annotations aloud. "The poet speaks of vulnerability as strength, of offering one's truest self despite the certainty of being wounded." He looked up at her. "That is a sophisticated interpretation." Eleanor did not know how to respond. She stood frozen, caught between her training to remain invisible and the impossible reality of this conversation. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor Hartley, Your Grace." "How long have you been at Ashworth Manor?" 8 years, Your Grace." He studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but something in his gaze held her. It was not the casual dismissal she was accustomed to from the aristocracy. It was genuine curiosity, as though he was truly seeing her for the first time. "You read often," he said. It was not a question. "When I can, Your Grace. I do not neglect my duties. I did not suggest you did." He turned back to the book, flipping through the pages. More of her annotations appeared throughout, thoughts and reactions carefully recorded in nearly invisible script. "You have strong opinions about poetry." "I did not mean to presume." "Presume what?" "That you are allowed to think?" There was something almost like amusement in his voice. "Tell me, what do you make of this one?" He opened to a page and handed the book back to her. Eleanor looked down at the verses, her mind racing. This was wrong, all of it. She should excuse herself, return to her duties, retreat to the safety of invisibility. But he was waiting, genuinely waiting for her response. "The poet writes of love as a choice rather than a compulsion," she said carefully. "He suggests that true devotion comes from conscious decision, not merely from passion or circumstance. And you agree with this interpretation?" Eleanor met his eyes, sensing that he wanted honesty more than deference. "I think the poet had never been truly without choice. When you have nothing, passion and circumstance are all you have. Choice is a luxury." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. That is a perspective born of experience. Yes, Your Grace. He took the book back, studying another page. I read this collection before I left for the war. I found it philosophical but distant. Academic. He looked at her. Your notes make it human. You have given these words life they did not have before. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, though she could not explain why. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever suggested that her thoughts had value. I should return to my duties, she whispered. Of course. But he did not move away. Miss Hartley, may I ask you something? Yes, Your Grace. Are you content here? The question took her completely by surprise. Content. What a strange word to apply to her existence. I am grateful for the position, Your Grace. Mrs. Pemberton has been kind. The work is honest. That was not what I asked. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw something unexpected. He was not asking out of idle curiosity or aristocratic condescension. He genuinely wanted to know. I am as content as circumstances allow, she said finally. He nodded slowly, as though her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Thank you for your honesty. He held out the poetry book. Keep this. Consider it yours now. These annotations make it more yours than mine anyway. Your Grace, I could not. You already have, he said gently. You have been reading it for years, have you not? Adding your thoughts, making it part of your inner life. The book has already chosen its owner. Eleanor took it with trembling hands, holding it against her chest, like something precious. Thank you. Perhaps, he said, his voice thoughtful. You might add more notes. I would be interested to read them, if you would allow it. Before she could respond, the sound of voices in the hall signaled Lady Ashworth's return. The Duke stepped back, the distance between them suddenly formal again. I will leave you to your duties, he said, his tone shifting to something more appropriate for master and servant. Eleanor curtsied deeply. Your Grace. He left the library, and she stood alone with the book pressed against her heart, her entire world tilted on its axis. What had just happened? A duke had spoken to her as though she were a person of worth. He had valued her thoughts, her interpretations, her mind. He had given her permission to keep the book, to continue writing in it. More than that, he had asked to read what she would write. He wanted to know her thoughts. Eleanor sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly unable to stand. Her hands were shaking, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was dangerous. This conversation, this attention, this moment of being seen. It violated every rule she had learned, every boundary that kept her safe in her prescribed place. Yet even as fear flooded through her, something else rose alongside it. Something she had thought long dead. The girl she had been before service, before loss, before learning to make herself small and invisible. That girl had loved ideas and books and conversation. That girl had believed her thoughts mattered. For a few minutes in this library, that girl had been allowed to exist again. Eleanor opened the book to a blank page in the back, pulled a pencil from her apron pocket, and began to write. Not an annotation this time, but a thought directed at him, at the Duke who had seen her. You asked if I was content. The truth is, I had forgotten what it meant to want more than contentment, to want to be known. Thank you for reminding me. She closed the book and held it for a long moment before tucking it carefully into her apron. Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and returned to her dusting. But everything had changed. The inciting incident had occurred. The careful order of her world had begun its irreversible crumble. Eleanor tried to return to her invisible routine, but invisibility proved impossible now. She was acutely aware of the Duke's presence in the house, could sense when he entered a room even before she saw him. And he seemed to be everywhere she was, or perhaps she was simply noticing him now in ways she had not before. 2 days after their library encounter, she was arranging flowers in the entrance hall when he descended the main staircase. Their eyes met. He nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement that sent heat rushing to her face. She curtsied and quickly looked away, but her hands fumbled with the roses, pricking her finger on a thorn. The next morning, she was carrying linens through the corridor when he emerged from his study. This time he paused, "Good morning, Miss Hartley." "Good morning, Your Grace." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Have you had time to add to the book?" "I have, Your Grace. A little." "I look forward to reading your thoughts." Then he continued on his way, leaving her standing in the corridor with her heart pounding against her ribs. That afternoon, while cleaning the library again, she found the book where she had left it tucked behind other volumes. She opened it to the page where she had written her note to him, and found a response in different handwriting, strong and precise. "You are known now. The question is what you will do with that knowledge." Eleanor stared at the words for a long time. He had found the book, read her note, and responded. This was no longer a chance encounter. This was something deliberate, something that felt like the beginning of a correspondence that should not exist. She should stop. She should return the book to its shelf and never touch it again. She should remember her place, her station, the impossible gulf between a duke and a servant. Instead, she picked up her pencil and wrote beneath his words, "I do not know what to do with it. For 8 years I have practiced invisibility. Being seen feels like standing in sunlight. After living in shadow, it is wonderful and terrifying in equal measure." She left the book in the library, hidden but accessible, a secret thing between them. The days took on a strange new rhythm. Eleanor would find moments alone in the library to read his responses and add her own. They wrote about poetry at first, safe discussions of metaphor and meaning, but gradually the conversation deepened. He wrote about the war, about returning home and finding himself a stranger in his own life, about duty and expectation and the weight of a title he had never wanted but could not refuse. She wrote about loss, about the person she had been before circumstances stripped away her choices, about finding small moments of beauty in a life defined by service. Their handwriting began to fill the margins of multiple pages, a private dialogue conducted in pencil marks that could be erased if necessary, though neither of them suggested doing so. Meanwhile, the Duke's presence in her daily life grew more frequent. He began appearing in rooms where she worked, always with plausible reason but lingering longer than necessary. He would ask her opinion on which books to send to the study, which flowers looked best in the drawing room. Questions that servants were not usually asked, that gave her permission to have preferences, to voice thoughts. Thomas noticed the change in her. One evening in the servants' hall, he studied her across the table with concerned eyes. "You seem different lately," he said carefully. "Do I?" Eleanor tried to keep her voice light, distracted. "Like your mind is somewhere else." He paused. "Eleanor, be careful. I do not know what you mean. I think you do." His voice was gentle but firm. "I have seen the way the Duke looks at you, the way he finds reasons to speak with you, and I have seen the way you look at him when you think no one is watching." Eleanor's face burned. "Thomas, nothing inappropriate has occurred. Not yet, perhaps. But Eleanor, he is a duke. You are a servant. There is no future in whatever this is. Only heartbreak." "I know," she whispered. "I know it cannot lead anywhere. Then why continue?" She met his eyes, and in them she saw true friendship, genuine concern. Thomas had always been kind to her, had always treated her with respect. He deserved honesty. "Because for the first time in 8 years I feel alive," she said quietly. "I know it is foolish. I know it will end badly. But Thomas, he sees me. Not the servant, not the invisible girl who empties chamber pots and polishes silver. He sees the person I am inside." Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, a brief squeeze of solidarity. "I understand. Truly I do. I just do not want to see you hurt." "I am already preparing for it," Eleanor said. And it was true. Even as she wrote in the margins of the poetry book, even as she allowed herself these moments of connection, she was building walls around her heart, or trying to. I know this cannot last. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things entirely. The next disruption came 3 days later, when Eleanor was carrying fresh linens to the guest wing. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with the Duke. He reached out to steady her, his hands on her arms, and for a moment they stood impossibly close. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, stepping back quickly. "The fault was mine. I was not watching where I walked." He glanced down the empty corridor, then back at her. I read your latest entry in the book, about finding beauty in small moments. I should not have been so personal, Eleanor said, though she did not truly regret it. Why not? Our entire correspondence has been personal. That is what makes it valuable. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Miss Hartley, I wonder if I might ask you something. Of course, Your Grace. Why did you never marry? Surely there were opportunities before you came to service. The question surprised her with its directness. I was too young when my parents died. And after I entered service, well, servants rarely have the luxury of romantic choice. We marry for practical reasons if we marry at all. But you have never been tempted? She thought of the young men who had shown interest over the years. A footman who had left to work in London. A gardener who had proposed out of loneliness rather than love. Thomas himself, whose kindness sometimes made her wonder if he felt more than friendship. I have been tempted to seek security, she said carefully. I have never been tempted to settle for less than genuine feeling. Even knowing that genuine feeling may never come? Even then, she looked at him directly. Some of us would rather be alone than live a lie. Something in his expression shifted, became more intense. I am being pressured to announce an engagement. My mother has decided that Lady Catherine Worthington would be a suitable match. Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet, though she had known this was coming. Of course he would marry. Of course it would be to someone appropriate, someone from his world. Lady Catherine is very beautiful, she managed to say. She is everything a duchess should be, accomplished, well-bred, connected to all the right families. His voice was flat, emotionless. We have nothing to say to each other beyond pleasantries. That is often the way of such arrangements, Your Grace. Yes. He studied her face. It is expected. Practical. The sensible choice. Then you should make it, Eleanor said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. You have duties to your family, to your title. You should not let them suffer because of passing fancy. Is that what you think this is? A passing fancy? What else could it be? She forced herself to meet his eyes. Your Grace, we have had some pleasant conversations. We have shared thoughts about poetry, but we live in different worlds. You will marry Lady Catherine or someone like her, and I will continue to serve in this house until I am too old to work. That is reality. What if I do not want that reality? His voice was low, urgent. What if I want something different? It does not matter what you want. Some things are impossible, are they? Or are they simply difficult? Eleanor shook her head, feeling tears threaten. Your Grace, please, do not make this harder than it already is. Make what harder? Letting go of something that was never mine to hold. The sound of footsteps approaching made them both step apart. A housemaid appeared around the corner, curtsied quickly, and hurried past with her eyes lowered. But the moment was broken. I should go, Eleanor whispered. Miss Hartley, please. She did not wait for his response, simply walked away as quickly as propriety allowed, her heart hammering in her chest. That evening, she found something unexpected in her attic room, a small package wrapped in brown paper, placed carefully on her pillow. Eleanor looked around, though she was alone, then opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. And tucked inside the front cover was a note in the Duke's handwriting. You said you were preparing for heartbreak. I am not. I am preparing to fight for something worth having. If you need more space than margins allow, right here. Tell me everything. I promise to listen. Eleanor sat on her bed, clutching the journal, and allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, exactly, but from the overwhelming confusion of feeling so much when feeling anything was dangerous. She was falling in love with a man she could never have, and he was offering her more space to fall. She opened the journal and wrote, her hand moving quickly across the first page. You ask me to tell you everything, but you do not understand what you are asking. I am not like the ladies you are meant to court. I wake at dawn to empty chamber pots. My hands are rough from lye soap and hard work. I own 3 dresses, and 2 of them are uniforms. I have no dowry, no connections, no future beyond service. If I told you everything, you would see how vast the distance between us truly is. She paused, then continued. But since you asked, I think about you constantly. When I dust the library, I remember the sound of your voice reading poetry. When I serve at dinner, I am aware of every movement you make. When I lie in this narrow bed at night, I imagine what it would be like if the world were different. If I were different, if we could simply be two people who found something rare in each other. She stopped writing, staring at the words. This was too much honesty, too much vulnerability. But he had asked for everything. And perhaps it was better to show him the truth so he would understand why they needed to stop this before it destroyed them both. The next morning, she left the journal in the library, hidden in the same place as the poetry book. By afternoon, it had been returned to her room with a response written below her words. You describe yourself as though your worth comes from your position. It does not. Your worth comes from your mind, your character, your ability to see beauty and meaning where others see only routine. You say the distance between us is vast, perhaps in the eyes of society, but in every conversation we have had, in every word we have exchanged, I have felt more connection than in a lifetime of appropriate social interactions. He continued on the next page. I am not blind to the obstacles. I know what society expects. I know the scandal that would follow if I chose differently. But I have seen war, Miss Hartley. I have seen men die for causes they did not believe in, following orders they knew were wrong. I have learned that life is too short to live by other people's rules when those rules serve no purpose, but maintaining comfort for those already comfortable. Eleanor read his words 3 times, her heart racing. He was not giving up. He was not accepting the reality she had tried to impose. He was fighting, just as he had promised, and she did not know whether to feel hope or terror at what that might mean. The following week brought Lady Catherine Worthington to Ashworth Manor for a formal visit. Eleanor watched from the margins as the beautiful young woman arrived in an elegant carriage, her governess and lady's maid accompanying her. Lady Catherine was everything Eleanor was not, tall and graceful, with golden hair arranged in the latest fashion, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Eleanor would earn in 10 years. Eleanor served tea in the drawing room, moving silently while Lady Ashworth made polite conversation with their guest. The Duke sat stiffly, his responses courteous but lacking warmth. Lady Catherine seemed pleasant enough, smiling at appropriate moments, discussing the weather and mutual acquaintances with practiced ease. My son has been quite restless since returning from the war, Lady Ashworth said, her tone pointed. I believe he needs the settling influence of marriage and family. I quite agree, Lady Catherine replied. A man needs purpose beyond military service. The management of an estate and the raising of heirs provides that purpose admirably. Eleanor poured tea with steady hands, though inside she felt something breaking. This was the future being arranged before her eyes. This sensible, beautiful woman would become the Duchess of Ashworth. She would walk these halls as mistress, would sit beside the Duke at dinner, would bear his children. As Eleanor moved to refill the Duke's cup, her hand trembled slightly. A few drops of tea splashed onto the saucer. It was a tiny mistake, barely noticeable, but the Duke looked up at her. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and she saw frustration there, and something that looked like apology. She finished serving and retreated to her corner of the room, waiting to be needed. The conversation continued around her, plans being made, expectations being set. A dinner party would be arranged. Lady Catherine would visit again next week. The courtship would proceed with appropriate formality. When the visit ended and Lady Catherine departed, Eleanor helped clear the tea service. She was carrying a tray back to the kitchen when she realized her father's pocket watch was missing from her apron pocket. Panic seized her. It was the only possession of value she owned, the only physical connection to her parents. She retraced her steps frantically, checking the drawing room, the corridor, the servants' hall. Nothing. She asked the other servants if they had seen it. No one had. By evening, Eleanor was fighting tears. That watch was all she had left of her father, of the life before service, of the person she had been. She was searching the library one more time when the Duke entered. Miss Hartley, are you all right? You seem distressed. Forgive me, Your Grace. I have lost something. A pocket watch. It belonged to my father. Her voice cracked. It is of no monetary value, but to me, it is everything. When did you last see it? This morning. I know I had it when I came to work. He studied her face, seeing her genuine distress. I will help you look. Your Grace, you need not— I insist. He began searching the library with her, checking between cushions, under furniture, along the shelves. After several minutes, he paused. Miss Hartley, could it have fallen in the drawing room during the tea service? Eleanor's heart sank. The drawing room had already been cleaned for the evening. Perhaps. I will ask Mrs. Pemberton if anything was found. Wait here. He left the library and returned minutes later, the silver pocket watch in his hand. It had fallen behind the settee. One of the maids found it while tidying. Eleanor took it with shaking hands, overwhelmed with relief. Thank you, Your Grace. Thank you so much. She opened the watch, showing him the inscription inside. To James, with love eternal, from Margaret, her parents' names. It is all I have of them. The Duke looked at the inscription, then at her tear-stained face. I understand what it means to hold on to pieces of the past, to need something tangible to remind us of who we were. I am sorry to have troubled you with this. You did not trouble me. He closed her fingers around the watch. Keep it safe. Some things are too precious to lose. She knew he was not only talking about the watch. 6 weeks had passed since that first encounter in the library, and the distance between propriety and desire had narrowed to something dangerous. Eleanor and Alexander continued their secret correspondence, the poetry book and journal passing between them like contraband. Their written words grew bolder, more honest, revealing depths neither had shared with anyone else. Then came the morning Eleanor found a letter tucked inside the journal. Not a message written in the margins, but a proper letter, folded and sealed with wax, her name written across it in his distinctive hand. She waited until she was alone in her attic room that night before opening it, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. Dearest Eleanor, it began, and the familiarity of that address made her breath catch. I can no longer pretend that what exists between us is merely intellectual companionship. I can no longer write around the truth when the truth is all that matters. I think of you constantly, when I wake, when I sleep, in every moment between. You have become essential to me in ways I cannot fully articulate. I see you moving through this house, invisible to everyone but me, and I want to tell the world that they are blind, that here walks a woman of extraordinary grace and intelligence, and I am humbled by her presence in my life. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes closing. This was everything she wanted to hear, and everything she feared. He was putting words to feelings that should remain unspoken, crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. She read on. I know the obstacles. I am not naive about what choosing you would mean. Society would turn against us. My mother would be horrified. Many of my acquaintances would cut ties. Lady Catherine's family would feel insulted. The scandal would be significant. But Eleanor, I have faced enemy fire. I have watched good men die for causes that meant nothing. And I have learned that the only thing worse than scandal is living a life of quiet desperation, married to duty while my heart belongs elsewhere. The letter continued for 2 more pages, laying out his feelings with devastating honesty. He spoke of the emptiness he had felt before meeting her, the sense that he was going through motions without purpose. He described the way their conversations had awakened something in him, had reminded him that connection was possible. That understanding existed. I am not asking you to decide anything now, he concluded. I am simply telling you the truth of my heart. You deserve to know that you are valued, that you are loved, and that I will wait as long as necessary for you to determine what you want. If you cannot choose this path, I will accept your decision, but if there is any part of you that might consider the possibility of us, I am prepared to fight for it with everything I have. Eleanor sat on her bed for a long time after finishing the letter, her mind spinning. He had used the word love. He was offering her something impossible and precious and terrifying, and she had to decide whether she was brave enough to reach for it. She spent the night writing her response, crossing out words, starting over, trying to capture the complexity of what she felt. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through her window, she settled on simplicity. Alexander, she wrote, using his given name for the first time. I am afraid. I am afraid of wanting something I cannot have. I am afraid of the consequences if we pursue this. I am afraid of losing you, and I am afraid of having you. But despite all that fear, I cannot lie. I love you. I have loved you since you first saw me as a person rather than a servant. I have loved you through every conversation, every written word, every stolen glance across a room. The question is not whether I love you. The question is whether love is enough when the world is determined to keep us apart. She sealed the letter and hid it in the journal, which she left in the library before beginning her morning duties. By afternoon, the journal had returned to her room with his response written below her words. Love is not enough on its own, but love combined with courage might be. Will you be brave with me? The answer rose in her heart before her mind could object. Yes. Against all reason, against all wisdom, yes. The declaration changed everything and nothing. Outwardly, life continued as before. Eleanor performed her duties, Alexander attended to estate business, and Lady Ashworth proceeded with plans for his courtship with Lady Catherine. But beneath the surface, a current ran between them, electric and undeniable. They found ways to steal moments together, brief conversations in empty corridors, shared glances across rooms filled with people who could not see what passed between them. Once, passing each other on the back stairs, his hand brushed hers, a touch so brief it might have been accidental, but they both knew was intentional. The correspondence continued, growing more intimate. Eleanor wrote about her dreams for a different life, about the woman she might have been if circumstances had been kinder. Alexander wrote about the future he imagined, one where position mattered less than character, where love was allowed to transcend artificial boundaries. But reality intruded. With increasing force, Lady Ashworth intensified her campaign for the marriage to Lady Catherine. She hosted a dinner party where Eleanor served and watched the Duke sit beside the beautiful blonde woman, making polite conversation while his mother beamed with approval. Eleanor's hands shook as she poured wine, and she saw Thomas watching her from across the room. Concern etched in his features. After the guests departed, Eleanor was helping clear the dining room when Lady Ashworth entered unexpectedly. The older woman dismissed the other servants with a wave, leaving Eleanor alone with her. "You have been with us for 8 years," Lady Ashworth said, her voice measured and cold. "Yes, my lady. Mrs. Pemberton reports that you are a diligent worker, reliable, discreet. I try to be. My lady." Lady Ashworth moved closer, her eyes sharp and assessing. "I am not a fool, Miss Hartley. I have observed certain things. My son seeks you out. He asks for you specifically when tasks need doing. He spends time in rooms where you happen to be working." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "I have done nothing improper, my lady. Perhaps not yet. But impropriety often begins with small things. A conversation here, a shared glance there." Lady Ashworth's voice hardened. "My son has responsibilities. A duty to his name, his family, and his position. He will marry appropriately, to someone who can fulfill the role of Duchess. Do you understand what I am saying?" "Yes, my lady." "Good. Because if I thought for a moment that you were encouraging inappropriate attention, I would have no choice but to dismiss you without reference. And finding another position without a reference is nearly impossible, as I am sure you know." The threat was clear and devastating. Without a reference, Eleanor would have no hope of respectable employment. She would be reduced to the worst kinds of work, or worse, the streets. "I understand completely." "My lady," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I thought you might." Lady Ashworth moved toward the door, then paused. "You remind me of someone I knew once. A girl with ideas above her station, who thought love could conquer all. Life taught her otherwise. I would hate for you to learn that same lesson the hard way." After Lady Ashworth left, Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The message could not have been clearer. Whatever existed between her and Alexander had been noticed, and Lady Ashworth would not tolerate it. Eleanor's position, her livelihood, her entire future hung by a thread. That night, she wrote in the journal with shaking hands. "Your mother spoke to me today. She made it clear that I must keep my distance from you, or I will be dismissed without reference. Alexander, I cannot lose this position. Without it, I have nothing. No home, no income, no future. I am not brave enough to risk everything, even for love. Perhaps especially for love, because losing you after having you would destroy me more completely than never having had you at all." She left the journal in the library, her heart breaking with every step away from it. This had to end. It had to end before they both lost everything. The journal returned to her room the next evening with his response, and the anguish in his words matched her own. Eleanor, my mother has no right to threaten you. This is not your fault. If anyone should face consequences, it should be me. I am the one who pursued this connection. I am the one who could not leave well enough alone. Do not punish yourself for my actions, he continued on the next page. But I understand your fear. I understand that you have more to lose than I do. A man in my position will always land on his feet, regardless of scandal. You do not have that luxury, so I will respect your wishes. I will keep my distance. I will stop seeking you out, stop finding excuses to speak with you. I will release you from this impossible situation. Eleanor read his words through tears, feeling relief and devastation in equal measure. He was giving her what she had asked for. He was setting her free. So why did it feel like losing everything? The final paragraph undid her completely. But know this, my feelings will not change. If circumstances were different, if the world were more just, I would choose you every time. In every possible life, in every possible version of this story, I would choose you. That will not stop being true simply because we stop acting on it. For 3 days, Eleanor avoided the library. She volunteered for duties that kept her in different parts of the manor, away from places where she might encounter him. When they did pass in corridors, she kept her eyes lowered, curtsied quickly, and moved on. It was agony, but it was necessary. The Duke kept his word. He stopped seeking her out, stopped asking for her specifically. To any observer, they had returned to the proper relationship between master and servant. But Eleanor felt his absence like a physical ache, a hollow space where something vital had been torn away. Thomas found her one evening sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at nothing. You did the right thing, he said gently, sitting beside her. Then why does it feel so wrong? Because love does not care about right or wrong. It just is. He placed a rough, calloused hand over hers. But Eleanor, you have to think practically. What kind of life could you have had with him anyway, even if he defied his mother, even if he was willing to marry you? Society would never accept it. You would be miserable, always on the outside, always reminded that you did not belong. I know, she whispered. My head knows all of this, but my heart does not seem to care. Hearts are foolish things. That is why we must sometimes ignore them. But ignoring her heart proved impossible when, 2 days later, she overheard a conversation that changed everything. She was cleaning an upstairs hallway when voices drifted from the Duke's study. The door was slightly ajar, and she recognized Lady Ashworth's voice. The engagement will be announced at the ball next month, Lady Ashworth was saying. Everything is arranged. Lady Catherine's family is pleased, and her father has agreed to favorable terms regarding the settlements. I have not agreed to this. The Duke's voice was tight with controlled anger. You have a duty, Alexander, to your name, to this estate, to the legacy your father left you. My father is dead. He does not get to dictate my life from the grave. No, but his memory does. Would you dishonor everything he built? Everything he sacrificed? There was a long silence. Then the Duke spoke, his voice heavy with defeat. When is the ball? 4 weeks from today. I have already sent the invitations. Eleanor did not wait to hear more. She fled to her room, her chest tight with pain. The engagement was being formalized. In 4 weeks, Alexander would stand before society and announce his intention to marry Lady Catherine Worthington. This thing between them, this impossible love, had a definite end date now. She pulled out the journal, intending to write something, anything, to capture what she was feeling. But the pages blurred through her tears, and she realized there were no words adequate for this kind of loss. Instead, she wrote something different. Not to Alexander, but to herself. A goodbye letter to the person she might have been if the world had been different. I am Eleanor Hartley, daughter of James and Margaret. I am not only a servant, though that is what I have become. I am a woman who loves poetry and ideas. I am someone who fell in love with a man I cannot have. I am afraid and brave in equal measure, and I am about to watch the man I love pledge himself to another, because that is what reality demands. She closed the journal and placed it, along with the poetry book, in the bottom of her small trunk. She would not look at them again. She would not torture herself with memories of what might have been. She would accept what was, and she would survive it, because that was what she had always done. The next morning, a new housemaid arrived at the manor. Lady Margaret, the Duke's younger sister, had returned from finishing school and brought with her personal staff, requiring adjustments to the servants' quarters. Mrs. Pemberton assigned Eleanor to help Lady Margaret settle in, a task that brought her face to face with a woman she had rarely encountered. Lady Margaret was 21, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that seemed unusual among the aristocracy. As Eleanor helped unpack trunks and arrange the rooms, Lady Margaret surprised her by engaging in actual conversation. "You are Eleanor, yes? My brother has mentioned you." Eleanor's hand stilled. "Has he, my lady? He said you have an extraordinary mind, that you understand poetry better than most scholars he has encountered." Lady Margaret studied her with open curiosity. "That is high praise from Alexander. He is not generous with compliments. I am sure his grace was simply being kind, my lady. My brother is many things, but gratuitously kind is not one of them. If he said it, he meant it." Lady Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, her posture relaxed in a way that Eleanor found both refreshing and unsettling. "May I speak plainly with you?" "Of course, my lady." "I have been away for 2 years. I left when Alexander went to war, and I have only now returned. But I can see that something is wrong with him. He goes through motions, but there is no life in him. My mother is pushing this engagement to Lady Catherine, and he is simply allowing it to happen." She looked directly at Eleanor. "Do you know why?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I am a servant, my lady. I would not presume to understand the Duke's inner thoughts. But you do understand them, do you not?" Lady Margaret's voice was gentle but insistent. "I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. And I see the way you carefully avoid looking at him at all." Eleanor felt panic rising. "My lady, I assure you, peace. I am not accusing you of anything improper. I am simply observing what is obvious to anyone who cares to look." Lady Margaret stood and moved to the window. "My brother is a good man, an honorable man, and he has been given so few opportunities to choose his own path. The title was thrust upon him. The war took 3 years of his life. Now our mother is orchestrating his marriage as though he were a chess piece rather than a human being. That is often the way with great families, my lady." "Yes, and it is wrong." Lady Margaret turned back to Eleanor. "If 2 people care for each other, truly care, should not that matter more than propriety? In an ideal world, perhaps, but we do not live in an ideal world. No. We live in a world where good people sacrifice their happiness because society demands it." Lady Margaret's expression was sad. "What a terrible waste that is." Eleanor did not know how to respond, so she remained silent. Lady Margaret seemed to understand, nodding slowly. "Thank you for your help with the unpacking. You may go." Eleanor curtsied and left, her mind reeling. Lady Margaret knew. Perhaps she did not know the full extent of what had passed between Eleanor and the Duke, but she knew enough. And rather than condemning it, she seemed to grieve for it. As Eleanor walked the corridors back to her duties, she felt the weight of the approaching ball like a physical pressure. 4 weeks. In 4 weeks, this would all be over. Alexander would belong to Lady Catherine, and Eleanor would return to her invisible existence, carrying the secret of this love like a scar no one else could see. The night before the engagement ball, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to prepare herself for what tomorrow would bring. She would serve at the ball, watching from the margins as Alexander announced his engagement to Lady Catherine. She would smile politely if required, curtsy appropriately, and maintain the perfect mask of servitude. Then she would return to this small room and allow herself to break apart in private. But fate, it seemed, had different plans. Near midnight, she heard footsteps on the stairs leading to the servants' quarters. Heavy footsteps, too heavy to be another maid. Then a soft knock on her door. "Miss Hartley?" "It is Alexander. Please, I must speak with you." Eleanor's heart stopped. The Duke, here, at her door, in the middle of the night. This was beyond inappropriate. This was scandalous. If anyone discovered him here, she would be dismissed immediately. Her reputation destroyed, but she opened the door anyway. He stood in the dim hallway, still dressed in his evening clothes, his hair disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. In his arms he carried a wooden box, old and worn. "Forgive me for coming here," he said quietly. "But I have discovered something, and you must know before tomorrow. May I come in, just for a moment?" Eleanor glanced down the empty corridor, then stepped back to allow him entry. He entered her small room, and suddenly the space felt impossibly tiny, filled with his presence. "What is so urgent that it could not wait until morning?" she whispered. "This." He set the wooden box on her narrow bed. "I was in my father's study tonight, going through his papers, trying to understand how I could honor his memory while feeling like I was betraying everything that matters to me. And I found this, hidden in a locked drawer." He opened the box. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, and a legal document bound with ribbon. Alexander lifted the document carefully, his hands reverent. "My father wrote this on his deathbed. I never knew it existed. My mother hid it from me. Your Grace, you should not be showing me private family documents. Read it." He handed her the paper. "Please." Eleanor took it with trembling hands and moved closer to the candle on her small table. The document was written in elegant script, dated 6 years earlier. She read slowly, her eyes widening as she absorbed the words. "I, Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Ashworth, being of sound mind in my final days, do set forth this codicil to my last will and testament. To my son Alexander, I leave not only the estate and title, but this counsel born of regret. I married for duty, as was expected of me. I wed a woman of appropriate station and breeding, and we produced heirs as required. But I did not love her, nor she me. We lived as strangers under the same roof, bound by obligation rather than affection. It was a hollow existence, and I regret it with every fiber of my being." Eleanor looked up at Alexander, shocked. He nodded for her to continue. "Therefore I make this demand of my son, on pain of dishonoring my true wishes. You must not repeat my mistake. You must marry for love, genuine and true, regardless of station or circumstance. This is not a suggestion but a command. The title and estate mean nothing if you live without joy, without partnership, without the kind of love that makes life worth living. If you marry for duty alone, you dishonor everything I learned too late. Choose love, Alexander. Choose it fiercely and without apology. That is the only legacy that truly matters." The document was signed and witnessed by the family solicitor. Below the signature was a note in smaller script. "This codicil supersedes all previous arrangements and expectations. The Duke of Ashworth must marry for genuine love, or the spirit of this inheritance is forfeit. No mother, no society, no expectation of propriety shall override this fundamental requirement." Eleanor's hand shook as she read the words again, unable to believe what they said. "Your father wanted you to marry for love," she whispered. "Not just wanted, required. This is legally binding. I had my solicitor examine it this evening. If I marry without genuine love, I violate the terms of my inheritance in spirit, if not in letter." Alexander's voice was rough with emotion. "My father lived with regret, Eleanor. He spent his entire marriage wishing for something different, and in his final days he tried to save me from the same fate. But your mother hid this from me. She wanted political connections, advantageous alliances. She wanted me to marry as she did, to continue the pattern." He ran a hand through his hair. "I confronted her tonight after I found this. She admitted she knew about the document. She said my father was sentimental and foolish in his final days, that his illness made him irrational. But Eleanor, this was written clearly and witnessed properly. My father was not irrational. He was honest." Eleanor sank onto the edge of her bed, her legs unable to support her. "What does this mean?" "It means I have permission. More than permission. I have a command from the man I respected most in this world." Alexander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I am not announcing an engagement to Lady Catherine tomorrow. I am telling the truth instead. Alexander, you cannot. The scandal will be significant, yes. My mother is horrified. She threatened to disown me, though legally she cannot. Some of society will turn away. But Eleanor, I have thought about this constantly. What is the alternative? Marry appropriately and spend my life as my father did, looking at a woman across the breakfast table and wishing she were someone else? Watching our children grow up in a house without warmth, dying with regret as my final companion? But I am a servant. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything to offer me. Intelligence, compassion, honesty, and the kind of love I thought existed only in the poetry we have read together. His gray eyes were fierce. I am not asking you to decide this moment. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to know that my father's blessing, such as it is, removes the greatest obstacle. I am not choosing you in defiance of my legacy. I am choosing you in fulfillment of it. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Your mother will make my life impossible. My mother will adjust or she will not. But her approval is not required for my happiness. Only yours is. He squeezed her hands gently. Tomorrow at the ball, I will stand before everyone and tell them the truth. I will not announce an engagement to Lady Catherine. I will explain that I am honoring my father's true wishes by waiting to marry until I find genuine love. And if you are willing, if you are brave enough, I will tell them that I have found that love with you. People will say terrible things. Yes. Your friends will abandon you. Some will. Others will surprise me. Lady Catherine will be humiliated. I spoke with her this afternoon. I told her the truth. She was hurt, but she admitted that she felt no real affection for me either. She is relieved, I think, to be released from an obligation neither of us wanted. Eleanor looked at this man kneeling before her in a servant's attic room, offering her something impossible and precious. She thought about his father's words, about choosing love fiercely and without apology. She thought about the poetry they had shared, about hope being the thing with feathers. I am terrified, she whispered. So am I. But I love you. And I love you. Is that enough? Eleanor took a shaking breath. She thought about Thomas's warnings, about Lady Ashworth's threats, about the sensible, safe life she could have if she simply said no. Then she thought about living the rest of her life, wondering what might have been, watching Alexander marry someone else, dying with regret as her companion. It will have to be, she said. Yes, Alexander, yes. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time they held each other properly. No barriers between them except their own fear. And in that moment, in a small attic room far from the grand halls below, two people decided that love was worth fighting for, whatever the cost. The day of the ball arrived with crystalline clarity, as though the universe had decided that such momentous events deserved perfect weather. Eleanor woke before dawn, her heart already racing. Today everything would change. Today she would step out of the shadows and into a light so bright it might burn her alive. She went through her morning duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The manor buzzed with activity as preparations reached their peak. Flowers were arranged, silver was polished until it gleamed, and the ballroom was transformed into something magical with candles and garlands. Mrs. Pemberton found Eleanor in the kitchen, her sharp eyes assessing. You seem distracted today. Just anxious about the evening. Mrs. Pemberton, I want everything to be perfect. The older woman studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor wondered if she somehow knew what was coming. But Mrs. Pemberton simply nodded. See that it is. Thomas pulled Eleanor aside mid-morning, his face concerned. Are you well? You look pale. I am fine. Eleanor. He took her hand, his voice dropping low. Whatever is about to happen, please be careful. I have a feeling something is brewing, and I do not want to see you hurt. She squeezed his hand, grateful for his friendship even as she could not tell him the truth. I will be as careful as I can be. Near noon, a package arrived at her door. Inside was a dress, simple but beautiful, made of deep blue silk that would complement her coloring perfectly. A note accompanied it in Alexander's handwriting. You should not have to wear a servant's uniform tonight. This belonged to my mother when she was young, before she became so rigid. She gave it to me this morning. It is her way of saying she will not stand in our way, even if she cannot entirely bless it. Wear it tonight. Stand beside me as yourself, not as what others have decided you must be. Eleanor held the dress against her body, looking at her reflection in the small mirror. The fabric whispered against her skin, promising transformation. Lady Ashworth had given this dress. The gesture was not warm acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. A grudging recognition that this was happening whether she approved or not. Afternoon brought Lady Margaret to Eleanor's room. The young woman entered without preamble, her expression determined. My brother has told me everything, she said. About tonight, about his intentions. I want you to know that I support you both completely. My lady, you do not have to— Yes, I do. Alexander has spent his entire life doing what was expected of him. He went to war because it was his duty. He came home and prepared to marry appropriately because that was what was required. But he has never chosen anything for himself, for his own heart. Lady Margaret took Eleanor's hands. You make him happy. I have seen it, and that matters more than all the social conventions in the world. People will talk. They will say terrible things. Let them. Small minds always speak loudest. But there will be others, Eleanor. Others who admire courage, who respect genuine feeling, who are tired of the endless performance of propriety. She smiled. I will be one of them. Standing beside you both, publicly, so everyone knows where I stand. Eleanor felt tears threaten. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Tonight will be difficult, but you will not face it alone. As afternoon turned to evening, Eleanor bathed and dressed with trembling hands. She pinned her hair up simply, the way her mother had taught her years ago. The blue silk dress fit perfectly, transforming her from servant to lady in ways that went beyond mere fabric. She stared at her reflection and barely recognized herself. This was Eleanor Hartley, not as she had been forced to be, but as she might have been if life had been different. This was the woman Alexander saw when he looked at her. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, dressed in formal evening clothes, his expression one of wonder when he saw her. You are breathtaking, he said quietly. I am terrified. So am I. He held out his hand. But we face it together. Are you ready? Eleanor thought about everything she was about to risk. Her position, her security, the safe anonymity she had cultivated for 8 years. She thought about Lady Ashworth's warnings, Thomas's concerns, and the scandal that would surely follow. Then she thought about Alexander's father, dying with regret, because he had never chosen love. She thought about the poetry they had shared, about spreading dreams at someone's feet and trusting them to tread softly. She took his hand. I am ready. They did not go down together. That would have been too much, too soon. Instead, Alexander descended first to greet guests as they arrived, while Eleanor waited in a small sitting room near the ballroom. Lady Margaret stayed with her, a silent source of strength. Through the walls, Eleanor could hear the sounds of the ball beginning. Music drifting up from the orchestra, voices rising in polite conversation, the rustle of expensive gowns and the clink of champagne glasses. This was society at its finest, gathered to witness what they believed would be a traditional engagement announcement. They had no idea what was actually coming. I spoke with Lady Catherine earlier, Lady Margaret said quietly. She arrived with her family, but she knows what Alexander intends. She has agreed to feign a prior commitment when the moment comes, so she is not publicly rejected. It is kind of my brother to arrange it that way. He is a kind man, Eleanor said. He is, and he deserves to be happy. Lady Margaret squeezed her hand. As do you. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Eleanor feared she had come to stop this, to pull Eleanor back to the servants' quarters where she belonged. But instead, the older woman simply looked at her, taking in the blue dress, the careful hair arrangement, the transformation. Your mother would be proud, Mrs. Pemberton said finally. She always had courage. I see that you inherited it, Mrs. Pemberton. I cannot say I approve of what is about to happen. I cannot say I understand it, but I will not stand in your way. She paused. I loved someone once, above my station. I chose safety instead of courage. I have regretted it every day since. The confession hung in the air, a gift of vulnerability from a woman who rarely showed any. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Pemberton nodded and withdrew, leaving Eleanor and Lady Margaret alone again. Through the open door, Eleanor could see other servants moving through the corridors, preparing refreshments, attending to last-minute details. Thomas passed by and caught her eye, his expression worried but supportive. He nodded once, a gesture of encouragement before continuing on. It is nearly time, Lady Margaret said. Alexander will make his announcement soon. Are you certain you want to do this? Eleanor thought about the question. Was she certain? No. She was filled with doubt and terror, and the absolute conviction that this would go badly. But beneath all that was something stronger. Love, choice, the determination to live authentically rather than safely. "I am certain," she said. They made their way toward the ballroom through the servants' corridors. Emerging into the grand entrance hall from a side door, Eleanor could see the ballroom beyond, filled with hundreds of people. The cream of society, dressed in their finest, diamonds glittering in candlelight. And at the far end, on a slightly raised platform, stood Alexander. His mother was beside him, her face composed but her eyes troubled. Lady Catherine stood nearby with her parents, looking serene and lovely. Alexander's eyes found Eleanor across the room. She saw him straighten, saw his resolve firm. This was the moment. This was where everything changed. He raised his hand, calling for silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Conversation faded. Every eye in the room turned to the Duke of Ashworth, expecting to hear the announcement of his engagement to Lady Catherine Worthington. "My lords and ladies," Alexander began, his voice carrying across the vast space. "Thank you for joining us this evening. I know you have come expecting an announcement, and I will not disappoint you. But the announcement is not what you anticipate." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lady Catherine's father frowned. Lady Ashworth's knuckles were white on her fan. Alexander continued. "Before he died, my father left me a document, a codicil to his will that I only recently discovered. In it, he commanded me, on pain of dishonoring his true wishes, to marry for genuine love rather than duty or social expectation. He had lived a life of obligation and regretted it deeply. He did not want that fate for me." The murmurs grew louder. People glanced at each other, confused. "Therefore, I will not be announcing an engagement to Lady Catherine Worthington tonight, though she is a remarkable woman who deserves someone who can love her as she deserves. With her blessing and understanding, we have agreed not to proceed with the match." Now the crowd was truly unsettled. This was unprecedented, scandalous. Alexander held up his hand for silence again. "I tell you this not to scandalize, but to explain. My father learned too late that a life lived for appearances is no life at all. He begged me not to make the same mistake, and I intend to honor that wish." He stepped down from the platform, moving through the crowd. People parted before him, confused. And curious, Eleanor's heart hammered as she realized he was walking toward her. "I will marry for love," Alexander continued, his eyes locked on Eleanor's. "I will choose genuine partnership over political alliance. I will choose someone who sees me as a man rather than a title, someone whose mind challenges me, whose spirit inspires me, and whose presence makes every day worth living." He reached Eleanor and extended his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling in his steady grasp. Together, they walked back through the crowd, which now buzzed with shocked whispers and pointed stares. Eleanor kept her head high, though she felt every eye on her, every judgment, every whispered condemnation. They reached the platform together. Alexander turned to face the assembly, still holding Eleanor's hand. "This is Eleanor Hartley," he said clearly. "Some of you may recognize her as a member of our household staff. But I ask you to see her as I do, as a woman of extraordinary intelligence and grace, as someone who has faced hardship with dignity, as the person I love." The ballroom erupted. Some guests gasped in shock. Others began talking loudly to their neighbors. A few people actually turned and walked toward the exit, their disgust evident. Lady Catherine's father looked apoplectic, though Catherine herself appeared calm, almost relieved. But there were other reactions too. An elderly duchess near the front, Lady Pembroke, began to clap. Slowly at first, then with increasing conviction. Her husband joined her, and then others. Not everyone, not even half, but enough. Enough to show that courage had its admirers, even in the rigid world of the aristocracy. Lady Margaret stepped forward and took her place beside Eleanor, her support visible and deliberate. "My brother has shown more bravery in this moment than in all his years at war," she announced. "I stand with him and with Eleanor proudly." Lady Ashworth remained where she was, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. She did not step forward to support them, but she did not condemn them either. Eleanor met her eyes across the distance and saw something unexpected there. Not approval, but perhaps understanding. perhaps even a hint of envy for the courage she herself had never possessed. Thomas appeared from the servants' entrance, still in his work clothes, and stood at the edge of the crowd. He caught Eleanor's eye and nodded once, firmly. She had his support, his friendship, regardless of what came next. Mrs. Pemberton emerged as well, standing with quiet dignity beside Thomas. She met Eleanor's gaze and offered the smallest smile, a gesture of encouragement from one woman who had loved unwisely to another who was brave enough to act on that love. Alexander turned to Eleanor, and in front of hundreds of people, he pulled a ring from his pocket. Not the ostentatious engagement ring that would have gone to Lady Catherine, but something simpler. His signet ring, the symbol of his house and heritage. Eleanor Hartley, I ask you before all these witnesses to be my wife, not because it is expected, not because it is advantageous, but because I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me? The ballroom fell silent. Every breath seemed held, waiting for her answer. Eleanor looked at the faces around her. She saw hostility and support, judgment and admiration, scandal and hope. She saw the life she was leaving behind, the servant's existence that had been safe but empty. And she saw the life being offered to her, uncertain and difficult, but filled with genuine love. She thought of Alexander's father, writing his final wishes. She thought of Mrs. Pemberton's admission of lifelong regret. She thought of the poetry they had shared, about spreading dreams at someone's feet. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, I will marry you. He slipped the signet ring onto her finger, and it hung there, too large but deeply symbolic. Then, with complete disregard for propriety, he pulled her close and kissed her in front of the entire assembly. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Some people cheered, others left in outrage. Arguments broke out. Lady Catherine gracefully departed with her family, her dignity intact. But through it all, Eleanor and Alexander stood together, choosing love over convention, courage over comfort. The climax was coming. The storm was about to break, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The hours following the announcement passed in a blur of heightened emotion and consequence. The ball continued, though half the guests had departed in scandalized fury. Those who remained seemed divided between genuine curiosity and morbid fascination, watching Eleanor and Alexander as though they were exotic creatures in a menagerie. Lady Ashworth withdrew to her private rooms without a word, leaving her son to navigate the social wreckage alone, or not entirely alone. Lady Margaret remained steadfastly at their side, her presence a shield against the worst of the whispered comments and pointed stares. As midnight approached, the remaining guests finally departed, leaving the ballroom littered with the debris of the evening. Wilted flowers, empty champagne glasses, and the lingering scent of scandal. Eleanor stood at the edge of the room, still wearing the blue silk dress, Alexander's signet ring heavy on her finger. "You should rest," Alexander said, appearing beside her. "It has been an overwhelming night. I do not think I could sleep if I tried." Eleanor looked at him. "What happens now? Now we face the consequences, together." He took her hand. "Come. There is something I want to show you." He led her through the manor to his father's study, a room Eleanor had cleaned countless times but never truly occupied. Alexander lit several candles, their warm glow pushing back the darkness. He moved to the desk and retrieved the wooden box containing his father's documents. "Read these," he said, handing her a stack of letters. They were with the codicil. Letters my father wrote to my mother over the years, letters she apparently never read. Eleanor sat in the leather chair and began to read by candlelight. The letters revealed a man trapped in a loveless marriage, writing beautiful, heartbreaking words to a wife who would never receive them. He wrote of loneliness within companionship, of sitting across from someone at breakfast and feeling utterly alone. He wrote of duty fulfilled, but happiness forfeited, of wondering what might have been if he had been braver. The final letter was dated a week before his death. "I have lived my entire life by other people's rules. I have been the duke they expected me to be, the husband they required, the father who did his duty. But I have never been myself. I have never chosen. This is my deepest regret, and it will follow me to my grave. If my son reads these words, I beg him to learn from my mistakes, to choose to live, to love without apology." Eleanor finished reading with tears streaming down her face. He was so lonely. Yes, and he wrote that codicil to save me from the same fate. Alexander knelt beside her chair. "Eleanor, I meant every word I said tonight. I love you, but I need you to understand fully what you are accepting. Society will not forgive this easily. Many doors will close to us. You will be scrutinized, criticized, perhaps even shunned. The life of a duchess is difficult under the best circumstances. As a duchess who rose from service, you will face extraordinary challenges, I know. Do you?" "Truly." His gray eyes searched her face. "I am asking you to step into a world that does not want you, that will test you at every turn. I am asking you to be strong in ways you have never had to be before." Eleanor set down the letters and took his face in her hands. "Alexander, I have been invisible for 8 years. I have scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots and bowed to people who barely acknowledged my humanity. I have been poor and alone and afraid, but I have survived it all with dignity. Do you honestly think I cannot survive the disapproval of people who have never known hardship?" He smiled, though his eyes remained serious. "You are the strongest person I know. Then trust in that strength. Trust that I understand what I am choosing." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I would rather face a hostile world with you than a comfortable one without you." They remained that way for a long moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. Then a sharp knock interrupted them. Lady Ashworth stood in the doorway, still dressed in her ball gown, her expression carefully controlled. "Might I have a word?" Lady Ashworth asked, her tone formal. "With both of you." Alexander stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor in an unconscious gesture of protection. "Of course." Lady Ashworth entered the study and closed the door behind her. She moved to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than Eleanor had ever heard it. "I read those letters years ago, the ones your father wrote. I found them after he died, and I realized that I had spent 30 years married to a man who was profoundly unhappy, who felt trapped and alone despite sharing my life." She turned to face them, and in the candlelight, Eleanor could see that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The worst part was that I felt the same way. We were two people living parallel lives under the same roof, both lonely, both unfulfilled, neither brave enough to acknowledge it or change it. Lady Ashworth's voice cracked slightly. "When Edmund wrote that codicil, I was angry. I thought he was being sentimental, that he was undermining everything we had built together. But the truth is, we had built nothing together. We had simply existed side by side." Alexander took a step toward his mother. "Why did you hide the document?" "Because I did not want you to know how unhappy we were. Because I thought if you married appropriately, as we did, perhaps you would somehow succeed where we failed." She laughed bitterly, as though repeating the same mistake could possibly yield different results. "Mother, let me finish." Lady Ashworth looked at Eleanor directly for the first time. "Miss Hartley, I owe you an apology. I threatened you. I tried to intimidate you into staying away from my son, because I was terrified. Not of scandal, though that is real, but terrified that you would give him something I never could. Happiness, love, partnership." Eleanor found her voice. "My lady, I never intended to cause pain, I know. That is what makes this so difficult. You are not calculating or ambitious. You are simply someone my son loves, and who loves him in return. And I am forced to acknowledge that love matters more than bloodlines or social position." Lady Ashworth moved closer, studying Eleanor's face. "You look like your mother. She had that same quiet strength, that same dignity. She would be proud of you." "You knew my mother well?" "Well enough to know that she was a better woman than I gave her credit for." "Better than I am, certainly." Lady Ashworth turned back to Alexander. "Your father was right. Life is too short to live for appearances. I have wasted mine doing exactly that, and I will not force you to waste yours." "Does this mean you accept Eleanor?" Alexander asked carefully. "Accept is perhaps too strong a word, but I will not stand in your way. I will not make your life, or hers, more difficult than it needs to be." Lady Ashworth straightened her shoulders, regaining some of her usual composure. "Society will be brutal. You know this. There will be consequences I cannot shield you from. We understand. Do you? Lady Catherine's father is already spreading poison about this family. 3 of our oldest allies left tonight vowing never to return. Your engagement book will be significantly lighter in coming months. I do not care about engagement books, Alexander said firmly. Perhaps not now, but there are practical considerations. This estate relies on connections, on goodwill, on relationships built over generations. You are risking all of that. For something worth more. Alexander took Eleanor's hand, drawing her to stand beside him. Mother, I have seen men die in muddy fields for causes they did not believe in. I have watched good soldiers follow orders that served no purpose but pride. I am done living by rules that make no sense. If the cost of loving Eleanor is social isolation, so be it. Lady Ashworth looked at them both for a long moment. Then she did something Eleanor never expected. She stepped forward and placed her hand over their joined ones. Then I will stand with you, not because I fully understand or approve, but because you are my son, and I have made enough mistakes in my life. I will not add driving you away to that list. It was not a warm embrace. It was not enthusiastic support. But it was acceptance, and that mattered more than Eleanor had realized it would.